There you go. All right. Hey, y'all. Thanks for joining us tonight. We already gave folks a couple minutes to get in here. So I'm going to get us started with some introductions. My name is Chris Morris. I'm the Communications and Outreach Director for the Northern Forest Canoe Trail. We started up this virtual programming back in 2020 to stay connected during the pandemic. And it turned into a really popular offering during the off season. So we've kept it rolling. If you want to catch up on past sessions, I think we have like 12 to 15 or so. I did drop a link in the chat. So you can take a look at those if you're curious what we've done in the past. Before we jump in, I do want to plug some upcoming NFCT events. We've got a ton going on this year, so I'm not going to try and do a whole preview of the season. I'm just going to talk about what we've got in the next month or so. On April 25th, we're in Concord, New Hampshire at the Red River Theater for the first stop of our Freshette Film Fest. The next day, we're in Portland on April 26th at Maine Studio Works for stop number 2. And then we take it to Vermont to Essex Cinemas and Essex Junction on May 2nd. And then the last stop is May 11th at the Waterhole in Saranac Lake. Again, I did drop that link into the chat if you want to check out the details on the film fest and buy tickets. Also on May 11th in Saranac Lake, we've got our Adirondack Race Series kickoff, the Round the Mountain Canoe and Kayak Race. And during that weekend, we've got some other activities that bookend the race as well. So that link is in the chat as well. And then finally, since we're talking about Maine paddling tonight, I want to plug our new race in Rangeley, the Rangeley Rendezvous, which is a 2-day, 40-mile paddling stage race. And that link is in the chat as well. Registration's open and it continues through May 31st. And also, just because I see Mac is here, I want to plug a May 29th talk in Saranac Lake that we're hosting at the Hotel Saranac. Mac and Mike Lynch, who used to work for the NFCT and is also a through paddler, are going to do kind of an informal presentation on paddling the NFCT with some beer and wine and hopefully nice weather to sit out on the deck at the hotel there. So if you're in Saranac Lake, that's on May 29th at 5 o'clock. That's enough promotion. I did include a link to our general events page in the chat as well if you want to see the full spectrum of what we've got going on this year. Tonight, we welcome Peter Macfarlane and Bobby Nolan, who are going to talk about some of their recent paddling adventures in Maine. I am sad to say James Shields couldn't join us tonight because of some power loss due to the storms in Maine. So instead, Bobby's going to do sort of a second presentation that he threw together to round out that time that we had allotted for James. And so the way this works, Peter and Bobby are going to present on their respective trips. As they speak, I encourage all of you to type questions into the chat, and I'll ask those questions once both presentations are wrapped up. And then depending on how many folks we have here still, we might be able to just open it up and let folks unmute and chat a little bit. But we will finish up no later than 8 o'clock. I like to keep it to an hour, and if we finish early, that's great too. I'm always about finishing early if you can. We are recording this session, and we are going to post it to YouTube tomorrow morning. So if you need to duck out, please don't fret. You won't miss out. You'll be able to rewatch. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over first to Bobby Nolan. Thanks, Bobby.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. I just have to do my screen share. Give me 1 second. Slideshow. So far, so good. And now we practiced this before and we got it. So you can see my screen now, everybody?
You're good to go.
All right. So I decided to do my presentation on a Magog from Errol Dam to the Rapid River Portage. And I have a bonus side trip at the end. So there's a lot of incredible short trips you can do on the NFCT. But I've visited the wildlife refuge every year since 2011 with my son and friends. I think it's a great place to go. And sometimes I think it doesn't get the credit it deserves. It's a designated national wildlife refuge that was established in 1992. The Maine-New Hampshire border runs down the middle of it. So that's where, if you're doing the canoe trail, you cross over into Maine. I wanted to present a section that's accessible, family-friendly, and offers a variety of environments for exploring and viewing wildlife, and camping, swimming. Mbeka checks all those boxes, but I think a lot of people think of it as a big windy lake, which it is, but the northwest section of the lake, it offers lots of protected backwater, meadows, ponds, little moving rivers. There's beautiful scenery of the mountains, wildlife, fishing, and it's just, you know, for me, it's just a really great place to visit. So we start right here. Let me make sure I have my map. So, oh, this is covering over my thing, so I just have to move this out of the way. So we start here. Can you see my mouse?
Yes, we can.
On the screen? So, okay, so we start here on Errol, right below the dam, and you can drive right up to the put-in, which is, you know, which makes it really accessible. It's right there in the town of Errol, New Hampshire. Now it's covering up my, sorry about this. There we go. This is I'm just having a little problem with my logistics here. So from Errol, you're gonna paddle about 3 miles upstream on very easy dead water to the lake. You're gonna pass by Harper's Meadow, Floating Island, and Sweat Meadow, and both of those areas are worthy of exploring. Harper's Meadow is a floating island national landmark, and Sweat Meadow is a scenic wetlands area. You have a good chance to see moose, beavers, otters, eagles, osprey, other waterfowl. And right before you reach the lake, there's a cut through that will bring you into the confluence of the Androscoggin and the McGalloway River. And from there, you can explore this area right over here, or you can just head right back to the main lake. So the opportunities for protected backwater paddling include Leonard Pond, and you can also make a side trip up the McGalloway River. I had to think for a second because it's pretty much just dead water, but it's also a beautiful section. Also, you'll notice on the map there's campsites, remote campsites that you can book through New Hampshire parks. So the remote campsites are managed by New Hampshire State Parks. You can reserve them in advance on Reserve America. Each site has standard pit toilet, picnic table, fire ring. And it's the only trip that we go on where we bring a cooler and we cook our food. You know, we load up our canoes pretty good, and because it's just a nice, easy trip in there. We hang our food. But in 12 years, I've never seen a bear in the area at all, but you do get, you know, squirrels and rodents. And then you can find additional campsites on the other side of the lake at Cedar Stump, which we can see later, and you can reserve those through Northern Waters in Errol. So this tree is really interesting. It was the tree where the last nesting bald eagles were in the state of New Hampshire up until 1949. And then they left because of the DDT and the pesticides. And when it was banned in 1972, in 1989, the first bald eagles came back to New Hampshire and they nested it in this tree. So as you paddle into Magog, you may see this tree, but you may not know the history of it. And the first nesting pair of bald eagles were there. They stayed in that tree for a pretty long time. And then eventually they moved on to another tree, but generally you'll see them in that tree all the time because they're fishing that little bay right over there. So like I said, one of the things I love about Mbegog, it's a great place to bring your family, introduce young people and friends to backcountry camping. So this is me and my son Shane. In 2011, we rented this Dagger Legend from Northern Waters in Errol. So motorboats are permitted on the lake, but you won't see many, especially in this part of the lake. You'll see some pontoon boats, small fishing boats passing through on the way to the eastern side. Most of the activity, most of the motorboat activity is on the Maine side. You do get a lot of bass boats and pontoon boats going up there, but this section of the lake seems to be, much quieter. It's popular with paddlers, kayakers, canoes. You really very likely have a quiet and peaceful time. So these are just some photos of the lake. You'll see lots of wildlife. You have a good chance of seeing moose if you explore the backwaters early in the morning or later in the evening. We spotted this cow moose just this past fall, along with a bull and a calf. But by the time I got my camera out, the bull was gone and the calf followed. We regularly see eagles, osprey, kingfishers diving in for fish. The usual loons, herons, ducks, mink, deer, beavers. We purify our water and we drink the water right out of the lake. So if you're into fishing, Magog is a real productive smallmouth bass fishery. Really good fishing. In the photo on the right is my son fly fishing on a shallow flat near a campsite. There's also, you have the opportunity to fly fish for native brook trout on the Rapid River. When we cross the lake, we'll see the Rapid River. And both New Hampshire and Maine fishing licenses are valid on the lake, regardless of which state you're in. If you want to fish the Rapid River, though, you'll need a Maine fishing license. So I mentioned that a Magog can be windy, but if we take a short hop right here, it's about a half a mile. Early in the morning or later in the evening is usually the best. You can explore the mouth of the Rapid River up to the rapids at Cedar Stump, where you can rent a campsite through Northern Waters Outfitters. This is the start of the 5-mile Northern Forest Canoe Trail portage to Lower Richardson Lake. So the portage runs along this just absolutely beautiful section of the Rapid River. This is, I was there one time I was there in the fall. If you're not continuing to Rangeley Lakes, you can stash your boat by Cedar Stump and hike the trail along the river. And you might run into this car, the abandoned car, in a spot they call the carpool, where you can, throw a fly in the river if you're inclined to do that. Actually, this year I met some kayakers who were paddling this, who were running the Rapid River. I met them at Cedar Stump while I was on my through paddle. It was pretty amazing, actually. So the Rapid River's, like I said, a beautiful spot to fly fish. Fly fishing only, catch and release, and barbless hooks are required. And for me, it checks off a lot of boxes for a really great outdoor experience with your friends, family. This is my son when he was, I guess, probably 14, swimming in a Magog and covering himself with mud. This is LL Cody, which is a must visit when you're in Errol to pick up supplies or just to see the big white moose. And the side trip that I was going to suggest is Molledgewok Brook at Molledgewok State Park. So Molledgewok Brook is a little brook that runs off of the Androscoggin. If you stay in the park there, you can paddle that area. It's about 6 miles of dead water upstream to Errol, where you can then portage to Magog, or if you're going straight to Magog, you can drive, or you can have somebody drive and meet them there. but Malaglock is just a beautiful little stream, worthy, worthy of the trip if you're going to be there. And yeah, I already covered that. So next is I'm going to introduce Peter, who's going to wow you with his trip. But I actually met Peter on Flagstaff Lake on Hurricane Island when I was doing my through paddle, and he just showed up, and there we are on Flagstaff Lake, and I guess it was still May of 2023. So I met two, like I say, I met two legends of the Northern Forest Canoe Trail while I was on my trip. One was Peter, and the other was Mac Truex, who I ran into on Rangeley Lake. And Mac took the only picture I have of myself in my canoe on that trip. So I'm going to pass it off to Peter. And thank you.
Right, thanks very much, Bobby. Yeah, so now for something completely different. This is an outline of a trip I took last year, and this is going to be very much an outline, so nothing like the detail that Bobby just gave us of Umbagog. Anyone who's paddled the Northern Forest Canoe Trail is aware that you have to drive a silly number of miles to get either to the start or back from the end. And it's useful to know some very, very willing people, which I've been fortunate to do. So that set me thinking about starting up, well, finding some, let me see if okay, sorting out a circuit. Can you all see a map?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorting out a circuit where you actually start and finish in the same place. And the first of these I did spring last year, and it's very largely in Maine with a little bit of New Hampshire. So I started near the Maine-New Hampshire border, went down the Androscoggin to its mouth in Merrymeeting Bay, where it meets the Kennebec. There I picked up the Arnold Trail, the route that Benedict Arnold took in his 1775 attack on Quebec City, coming up the Kennebec, all the way to Wyman Lake, and then across what's called the Great Carrying Place, a bit more of that soon, which leads me into Flagstaff Lake, which is where I bumped into Bobby, as he just said, and then went up the north branch of the Dead River, aiming for the Canadian border. I wasn't going to go all the way to Quebec City and lay siege to it. That seemed a little unneighbourly. Came back down, came up the south branch of the Dead River, or actually took a shuttle because that was it was empty, into the Rangeley Lakes, and of course the Rangeley Lakes, including Umbagog, spill out into the Androscoggin, which brought me back to where I started. So all I had to do was to drive myself to the beginning point, and the car was still there at the end. So let's see. That's me at the start, and it's in Shelburne, New Hampshire. The Androscoggin is a wonderful river to paddle down. It was flowing well. It's a mix of very gentle riffles, swift water, some more sluggish water behind the dams. In terms of campsites, then, yeah, there's not a lot official. You're going to have to search around to find somewhere. So that's probably enough of that. You get the picture. Campsites is nothing much. This was a little island above Rumford, Maine, that I found for my first night. But again, it was a case of find whatever I could for most of it. And of course, going down the Androscoggin, you're going to drop a large amount of elevation. A lot of it, this is in Rumford itself, but there are several dams. And of course, beginning and finishing at the same place, all of that elevation drop has got to be regained at some point. Now, there are many dams. This one happens to be Riley Dam, and the portages around them are not well signed, and the put-ins are not particularly brilliant. This one had a very nasty recirculation. I'm a confident paddler, but even that had me wondering about how to get out of there. Yeah, and the put-ins, okay, the best you could hope for here was not to get a broken ankle. And it's similar to this one. This is at the bottom of Gulf Island Pond, heading round Gulf Island Dam. Again, it's just nasty takeouts, not very well signed portages. But there's always a route, but you have to search for it a bit. Now, where does this get us to? Oh yeah, so you finally get to Brunswick, Maine, Topsham on the left, Brunswick on the right, and that beyond there you're heading out into Merrymeeting Bay, and this is big water. To give you a sense, this is all Merrymeeting Bay. I was there in a pretty nasty northwest wind and an ebbing tide, so the Kennebec and the Androscoggin all exit through what's called the Chops, which is about a quarter mile wide, no more. So that's a huge amount of water exiting through there. It's not the place to be in a small underpowered craft. So I deliberately tried to avoid that there's an ebbing tide and northwest wind blowing me in that direction, so I hugged the north. Coming across this bit, that was a tough haul. There's a very brief video that I took by accident, but it'll give you a sense of the wind. That's it. And you can see the kind of conditions there. Getting back to the map, so I could see that this part was shallow, but didn't want to come round it here and get too near to the Chops. So I went inland. Well, not inland. It was all water until I ran out of depth with the ebbing tide. So somewhere several hundred yards offshore, I was out of my canoe, traipsing through a couple of inches of water on the mud, dragging my canoe, and anybody on the shore watching that would have been thinking, he's not from around here. But anyway, that gets me into the Kennebec, and the Kennebec is now upstream, and some of it is fairly placid, easygoing, deep water, some of it less so. That's a fairly typical view of the Kennebec. It's a very beautiful river. It would be much easier to go down it than to come up it. That gives you a sense. This is approaching Augusta, and that gives you a sense of the current midstream. For some of the shallower bits, I poled. I used a technique of double poling with a pair of ski poles. I'm using a double poling action. That's what I'm doing here against at least a 2 mile an hour current, and I'm probably making 1 or 2 miles an hour upstream doing that. And the water was plenty shallow enough to allow that. Again, the number of campsites around here was, well, there really weren't any. No official campsites that I could find. So it was a case of find anywhere that I could, and I was never struggling to find somewhere. As long as you're happy with remote camping, then you'll find somewhere. Other help going upstream? Well, boom piers make great launching points. Get some speed up in the eddy, cut across the flowing water back into the next eddy, get some speed up again, and just slingshot from boom pier to boom pier, heading upstream. This is approaching Madison Dam. The morning had been beautiful up until that point, making really good time up from Norridgewock. This bit slowed me down somewhat. That was a tough haul to get up to where there was a boat launcher to take out, to carry around the dam. It gives you some sort of sense of the kind of water. And then eventually you get to the top of, well, the top that I did, the top of the upstream in Wyman Lake, above Wyman Dam. And this will give you an idea. That's Wyman Dam. This is all Wyman Lake. And this is the continuation of the Kennebec that goes up towards Grand Forks, which is where it meets the Dead River. So I could have gone up there and then up the Dead River. But A, that's not the way that Arnold went. and B, that would have involved a whole load more upstream against rapids. So from Wyman Lake, camped there, I used the Great Carrying Place, which is roughly an 11-mile hike across here, punctuated by a very small short paddle across East Carry Pond, slightly longer one across Middle Carry Pond and a bit of sandy stream, and then a slightly longer one across West Carry Pond, but a whole load of carrying. Now, the directions I got from the Arnold Expedition Historical Society clearly state cross a stream and then turn left on a worn tote road. I somehow missed the first part of those directions and ended up carrying on what I thought might be a tote road, but clearly ceased to be. This is a place where you really shouldn't be taking a canoe. I knew Arnold's men had complained about the uphill, but this was ridiculous. And then, of course, I still had to cross that same stream that I could have crossed on a bridge, except that where I was now, navigating by dead reckoning, it was more of a canyon. And this is where things got ridiculous. I was literally canoe rock climbing. I don't recommend it. The walls weren't vertical, but they weren't that far off it. So by the time I got out the other side of there and reached East Carry Pond, my legs, well, they'd disappeared in amongst rocks and got scraped up, and essentially they were dead. Far too much hard work. But carried on. When I got back on the trail, it's very clearly marked. It's wonderfully marked. And I could have been coming across signs like this had I got it right from the very start. So that was at East Carry Pond, got to West Carry Pond, come up Sandy Stream, and here you meet the Appalachian Trail. So you hike along the Appalachian Trail, carry along the Appalachian Trail to West Carry Pond. The trail, the AT then heads off to the south, around the south, and up into the Bigelow Range, somewhere south of Flagstaff Lake. But if you're carrying on along the Arnold route, you cross over West Carry Pond, and then the last part of the carry is mostly on road, just the last little bit leading down to Flagstaff Lake is on a trail. And Arnold had to go a little bit further to reach the river, but it's now, of course, flooded because of Long Falls Dam creating Flagstaff Lake. So that was I was pretty dead by the time I got here, and 5+ miles further in, up there somewhere, I came across Hurricane Island, and that's where I met Bobby, and he was astute enough to realise that this guy paddling towards him had just had a pretty tough day. Thanks for noticing. Anyway, going to the west end of Flagstaff Lake, it was then time to go up the north branch of the Dead River. And this is where things got a bit tougher, because above Eustis Dam, there really wasn't a lot of water in the river. These are meant to be floating. So the river was tough to ascend, and several times I thought about just turning around and coming back down. But something told me that I really wanted to see the chain of lakes at the top. So every time that thought popped up in my head, I had to push it back down and carry up through rock gardens. There aren't that many marked carries along here, so there was a lot of wading up rock gardens, almost running out of water. But I got as far as the chain of ponds. This is the dam at the bottom of Lower Pond, and went up the chain of ponds. I forget which one it is, probably Long Pond, but I'm not sure, and camped at the top of the top pond, which is Natanis Pond, camped at the Natanis Point campground. At that point, I'd planned to take a day trip to the Canadian border and back, but with the lack of water that I was facing, I just decided it was going to be too miserable. So next day, turned round, came back down the same north branch, passing the same obstacles. It wasn't much faster coming downstream than going up, which tells you something about the lack of water. And then, that's jumping ahead. And then spent the night in Stratton. Next day, took a shuttle up past the south branch, which was obviously too empty. And at this point, I was ahead of schedule. I hadn't taken a trip to the Canadian border. I hadn't taken a couple of days to get up the South Branch, so I decided to spend a few days sightseeing on the Rangeley Lakes, all those bits of them that I hadn't previously seen. Except that by the time I got to Rangeley Lake, well, 2 days previously going up the North Branch, there was a high of 90 degrees. Here there was a high of 45 degrees, and it was just miserable and cold and raining, and I couldn't see anything. So sightseeing seemed to be a poor option. So I just decided to head for the end and finish the trip early at this point. So I headed out, Mooselet McGuntick, Richardson Lakes, and that's Pond in the River. A couple of mornings later, Pond in the River, part of the Rapid River carry, or not the carry as it were, that Bobby referred to. And that spilt me out into Umbagog Lake, and from Umbagog empties the Androscoggin. So I'm now back on the river where I started, with lovely rapids going downstream. This is probably somewhere near Molledgewok, I believe, that Bobby referred to. It's somewhere not far from there. And a bit further down, we go past Errol, and then eventually got to Gorham, or past Pontook, got to Gorham. No, not Gorham, Berlin, sorry, Berlin first of all. There's a series of, I think, 5 dams in Berlin, and you can carry past them on an old rail bed, except there's no official put-in. At this point, I'm roughly the same altitude as the top of the building over there, and this slope down there, that's about 4 or 5 canoes lengths down this grassy slope in front of me, before then fighting through the vegetation to find a put-in. So again, carries around dams are not well signed in this region. But having got back in, then here's a video that Ray, who's on here tonight, took of me approaching. This is the lower Gorham portage. And yes, it was raining again. I'd had 2 weeks of perfect weather, hot, sunny and everything. And then the last few days it turned cold and raining. And this is me coming into the end to finish underneath Shelburne Bridge, Shelburne, New Hampshire, which is exactly where I started 18 days previously. So it's a trip that was meant to take 3 weeks, finished it in 18 days. And that's what the underside of the canoe looked like. Most of that was the result of the North Branch of the Dead River. Not that much of it from rock climbing, to be honest. And a bit of sandpaper, a little bit of epoxy, and another couple of coats of varnish, and it looks like that. And there we go. That's a circuit very largely in Maine that's open to anybody who's got a sense of adventure. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand you back to Bobby. Over to you, Bobby.
Thank you. That was awesome. Yeah, I saw Peter coming up the steps onto Hurricane Island that day when he did the 15-mile long carry, and he looked like he had a tough time. So, but he was really helpful to me because yeah, I still wasn't sure if I was going to make it. So yeah, he helped me out quite a bit in that regard. So unfortunately, James, his power's out and he wasn't able to do his presentation. And so I had all my photographs are really well organized. So I was able to quickly put together a, oh, I have to do the screen share first. I'm going to fumble around this because I'm not used to it. So I have to put it onto slideshow first and then get rid of this. And why can't I see screen share? Because, sorry.
Bobby, while you're doing that, I just want to remind folks in the chat to ask questions if you've got them, and we'll get to those when Bobby wraps up this next piece of his presentation.
All right. So you can see this screen right here where it says Rockwood to Fort Kent.
Yes.
So this was all, I did this all just a little while ago. And most of the photos here are from my trip last year, but I did throw, you'll notice some of them are in a different boat. I did throw some in from the Allagash from the year before when I was in a different boat. So if you notice that, that's why. So yeah, James did Rockwood to Fort Kent. Rockwood being where Rockwood being right here. When I did this trip last year, I came right out of the Moose River, so I didn't start in Rockwood, so I don't know necessarily how to get to Rockwood if that's going to be your entry point, but I'm sure it's fairly easy to figure out. And on Thursday evening, I paddled here and I stayed on Farm Island. It had been really windy. This a few days prior to that, Mac Truax was actually there right before I was, and was posting how windy it was on Moosehead Lake. But the weather report was that on Friday morning it was going to be real calm, and it was. So I got to Farm Island on Thursday evening, and then on Friday morning it was raining and really foggy, but you can see that Moosehead Lake was real flat and very little wind. So I made real good time on Moosehead Lake to the Northeast Carry general store, and I was so wet and I was so freezing. I was hoping that they would be open. And this is Briar, she's the new owner of the Northeast general store, and they were open, and she made me 2 hamburgers that were just really awesome. So after the Northeast general store, you have about a 2-mile carry to the West Branch of the Penobscot River. From the West Branch of the Penobscot River to Chesuncook. She corrected me because I was calling it Chesuncook, and Briar corrected me and said it's Chesuncook. So I think that that's correct. So this is the West Branch of the Penobscot River to Chesuncook. And this is, I'm not sure if it's pronounced Hero Island or Giro Island, but that's where I camped in a lean-to when I arrived there. So the sun came out for the first time when I hit the West Branch, and West Branch was just absolutely beautiful. And then it started raining again right after that. It just rained for, I think it was 12, 13, 14 days from when I was at Spencer Stream. It started raining, and it rained right up to the end of the trip with a few breaks. So Chesuncook is also just a stunning, beautiful lake. It's a small incorporated settlement on the northwestern shore, which people visit. I did not visit because I was just so wiped out. I didn't take the opportunity to go there, but a lot of people do, and it's could be worth your while. So this is the sunset from my campsite. This is just a panorama of the lake. It was flat. It can be used, very often real windy, but it was just really beautiful. I just fell in love with it, as well as I had good conditions on Beziscus stream as well. It was kind of nice out. Again, started raining later, but just a real beautiful stream. And I had water. A lot of times it's real low, and people struggle through there. So then I had the executive decision that I had to make, which was to paddle into Beziscus Lake and do the mud pond carry, or walk the 7 miles on the logging road, which is what I decided to do, because with my gear and just my general state of condition, I thought I was going to have to do 3 trips on mud pond carry, and I just didn't feel I had it in me. I was really pretty worn out by that point, so I decided to do the 7-mile walk on the logging road, which was kind of interesting actually, on the way to Chamberlain Lake. So that's the start of the Allagash Wilderness Waterway, which I've done a few times before this trip. So I was pretty familiar with it. That's why you'll see two different boats. But the start of it is Chamberlain Lake, to, Eagle Lake, Round Pond, and then Churchill Lake to Churchill Dam. So my first night there, so I left Chesuncook and I got to Chamberlain Lake after the logging road, paddled to Lock Dam. I got there just around sunset, and here's, I have a video of Lock Dam. So this is Lock Dam and Martin Stream, which is a short portage. Now I always do that portage. There's another portage that you can do right over here, which brings you to the ghost trains. And I didn't stop there this year, but the year before I stopped at the ghost trains. You can still get there from Eagle Lake. It's just really an incredible thing to see, but it's super, super buggy in there. So if you decide to do the other portage, I think it's about 3/4 of a mile, and I'll take you to these trains and right out onto Eagle Lake. But it is, every time I've been there, it's just, it's the buggiest place on the planet, I think. This is Russell Cove on Eagle Lake, right before you get to the ranger station right there. So from Churchill Lake to Round Pond. So from Chamberlain Lake, I'm sorry, I got this a little mixed up because I threw it together, but yeah, Chamberlain Lake, Chase Rapids. I think I have this right in order. Musaskus, Long Lake Dam, Harvey Pond, and Round Pond. So this is Chase Rapids last year. This is when I was with my friend, and this is the beginning of Chase Rapids. And this is where we got into a little bit of trouble. And we got stuck on the rock and had to kind of work our way around that. But Chase Rapids it's just a lot of fun. But this is really the first time I ever ran rapids in my entire life. And you see, we almost went over there, but we didn't. So this is the Allagash River, just beautiful, nice river to paddle. Here's Long Lake Dam, and this is Harvey Pond. This moose just swam right up to me. I was paddling in Harvey Pond. This was 2 years ago, and I saw the moose swimming towards me, so I just stopped, and she swam right up to me and started diving down for weeds to eat, and I took some pictures of her and then kind of backed off a little bit, but she was pretty chill. Here's some cormorants. This is last year, some cormorants on Round Pond. And this might have been the highlight of my trip last year. So there were about 12 of these river otters, and by the time I got my camera out, they were all gone. But then these two came back and gave me a little show before they took off right there. That was just really, really awesome. So you have the Allagash River to Allagash Falls, and then after that, the town of Allagash. So here's Allagash Falls. There's only 2 portages on the Allagash Wilderness Waterway. There's a real short one around Long Dam, and then there's the portage around Allagash Falls, which is, I think, about 1/4 of a mile. Pretty easy, and you can put right in there and paddle back upstream a little bit and get a photograph of the falls, or some people take a picture there to make it look like they paddled down the falls. But I didn't do that. And then when you get to the town of Allagash, there's the big payoff after all that, which is the Two Rivers Lunch. You can get 2 breakfasts. If you're doing the Allagash Wilderness Waterway, you can get the pancakes and you can get the the bacon and eggs. So from the town of Allagash to Fort Kent, I think is about 35 miles. And I stopped, you have about 6 sets of rapids between Allagash and Fort Kent throughout the trip on the St. John River. St. John River is also often very low, but we had so much rain. I had plenty of water in the St. John River. So I stayed at Pelletier Campground that night. So if you're doing the Allagash Wilderness Waterway, you can call Pelletier, and Norman can either, come and get your car or bring you down to whichever entry point you're going to be on the Allagash. And my 2 previous trips there, I ended in Allagash. I didn't go past there this, last year. I went past there. I stayed at Norm's place. He's a great guy. So if you ever need anybody, just look up Pelletier Campground in St. Francis, Maine. And here's my obligatory picture at the end of the trail. So I was so cold and I was shaking and freezing. And there was a children's birthday party in the park there. And I walked up to go to the men's room, and the people saw me coming, and I was actually shaking, and they were, I think they were afraid of me, because I think they thought I was like some crazy person, but I kind of looked a little bit like a crazy person there. But I had to go into the men's room, and I stood in front of the hand dryer to warm off, and then I changed my clothes, and then I went to the diner in Fort Kent to have some food and wait for my friend to come and pick me up. So that's from Moosehead Lake to quickly from Moosehead Lake to Fort Kent, Maine. I'm going to hand this back to Chris, but I have to. Oh, there it is. How do I give up? We had a problem with this before. How do I give up? Oh, there we go. The stop share.
There we go. Very good. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it. I am going to go through. We have just a few questions here in the chat that we'll go through. And I did want to also shout out Warren Whitney, aka Whit, who joined us a little bit earlier, our new NFCT board chair. So excited to welcome Whit tonight. Glad you could make it. All right, so Aaron had said he hadn't heard of the double ski pole technique and was curious what length poles you used approximately. That was also my question.
Okay, regular downhill ski poles. I've got fairly wide diameter because you want them to be stiff. I wouldn't use adjustable ones. I would practice with them before you try to use them in anger, as it were. They are fine. Let me back up a little bit. Poling is great. I've done it in a large, stable canoe on flat water. My canoe is small, it's narrow. It doesn't have a whole load of stability. So standing up in that on rapids, trying to push off an uneven rocky bed, it was an accident waiting to happen. So that was why I investigated this alternative technique. I won't go into the history of how I came about it. But it does take some upper body strength, but it's not just brute strength. There's a lot of technique to it. I did put together a little video for Small Boats Monthly. It's a few years back now. So if you subscribe to Small Boats Monthly magazine, which is an offshoot of Wooden Boat, then you'll be able to find an article in there which will tell you more about it. But the length of poles, you don't want them to be too long, because if you're just wielding them by the ends, you've got minimal leverage. It's not as powerful as a regular pole, but it's good for shallow water when you can't sink a blade.
And a follow-up question from Aaron: were you kneeling when you were doing the poling?
Yes, very much so. Yep, you need as much good contact with the canoe as you can get.
A question from Bill, who started by saying great presentations, both of you, and I agree. How did you handle your navigation? Maps, GPS, both, all of the above?
Bobby?
Well, I used the maps. I had Katina's guidebook as well. So every night I would read my upcoming section. I read the book 3 times before I did my through paddle. And I used the maps as much as I could. I had the Far Out app, which I really recommend. You don't have to use it all the time, but when you need it, it really comes in handy. And particularly when you are coming up to a portage right before a dam or a waterfall, and you want to really pinpoint it. So I was a little bit of a nervous traveler when I was on my trip because a lot of this was all new to me, and I didn't have a lot of it. I just didn't have the experience with. So I had the Far Out app, and it was helpful in those situations. It was also helpful to me when I got. There was one time I was doing a portage on, I forget which one it was, but it was on a logging road, and it was a rather long one, and you had to make a turn, and I missed the turn. And then a while I'm just walking along thinking everything's fine. I was like, I think I missed the turn, and I took out the Far Out app, and I saw, okay, I'm off the trail. So I recommend it, but if you want to go with just maps and a compass, it's that's a good way. And I did try to use only those, but I use the Far Out app from time to time.
Yeah, for my NFCT through paddles, I used only maps and compass. I carried a spot GPS, but that was to let other people know where I was, rather than it didn't tell me where I was. For my trip last year, I used Gaia GPS on my phone, and that proved useful when I was lost in the Great Carrying Place, because I could pinpoint where I was and where the trail was, and therefore allowed me to head in the appropriate direction, just dead reckoning towards it, to try and converge with it. But by and large, I'm a map and compass person, and it hasn't proved infallible.
Awesome. I see one other question here from, I'm assuming it's pronounced Earl. I apologize if it's not. Where did you take out in the town of Allagash? I think that was a Bobby question.
Oh yeah, right in front of the diner. There's a Pepsi sign. So as you hit the town of Allagash, so Norm, if he brings your car there and parks it at somebody's house and says, look for the Pepsi sign. So there's a Pepsi sign right there on the river. So you can pull your boat right up onto the shore and walk up the riverbank, have your breakfast, and if you're ending your trip there, you can come back and get your boat, or you can continue on to Fort Kent.
Yeah,
there's a lot. I'm just going to add. There's a lot of places if you want to do parts of this trip, you can start in Rockwood. You can start. I imagine you could start at the Northeast Carry, but I don't know how to get to the Northeast Carry, but you can start there. You can start at Chamberlain Lake, so you could have somebody. You can drive in there and have Norm pick up your car, or you can bring your car to Norm and he can drop you off there. What's it called? Michaud Farm, right where you can start the trip right there at Churchill Dam, right by the Chase Rapids. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. If you look at the maps, you can see the different entry points.
Yeah, on my first through paddle, I camped in Allagash. I camped at the McBriarty place. The daughter of I forget her name now. Was it Deborah? I think. She continued the tradition of that her mother had started
Deborah.
of allowing through paddlers to camp on the property, and to get there you take out immediately above the road bridge on the left. There's an easy takeout there, and you can go straight up to the house from that point.
Right on. Well, we're just about at 8 o'clock, and I like to keep these things under an hour if we can. I am sharing one more thing in the chat, one more link there. It is an overview of our waterway work trips this summer, and Bobby's discussion about the Allagash waterway wilderness was apt because we have a new crew this year, a specialized Allagash crew doing some of our project work in Maine. So if you're interested in joining us on a work trip this summer, we have a few trips scheduled along the Allagash. I encourage you to check them out. You can come hang out with Ethan Israel is the leader of our crew. He was an intern last year, as well as a few other interns and some volunteers. So a great way to check it out and help us out as we work on some of these access points and other projects along the way. So with that, I'm going to just ask everybody to join me in thanking Bobby and Peter again for these presentations. It was really great. I get to go to Maine this summer for a little bit of time, so I'm really excited to do some paddling up there of my own. And I will say, as we were wrapping up here, I was texting with Noah Pollock, our stewardship director, and we are talking about putting together a virtual session later this month to discuss the stewardship season. So you can get a really good overview of what we're going to be up to over the next few months. So I would keep an eye out for that. When we figure out the date and time, we'll be sharing that through our email and our social media channels. So hope you can join us for that as well. That's it. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. Thanks, Chris.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Bobby. Thanks all for coming.
Good to see you, Peter.